Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. I'm Reed Cowan. President-elect Donald Trump rolling out his latest picks for key cabinet position within his administration. We're talking about 16 names in total that are now added to that list that came together pretty fast, right? So here's the latest. Former Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard picked for Director of National Intelligence. Florida Senator Marco Rubio tapped for Secretary of State, and former Congressman Matt Gaetz getting lots of headlines today, named as Trump's pick to be Attorney General. All of those candidates will now need to be confirmed by the Senate before assuming those positions. That's if senators do not do what the president-elect really wants, and that's the so-called recess confirmations, which would essentially circumvent confirmation hearings and then fast-track these appointments. So the Gaetz nomination sent shockwaves through Congress. You're likely hearing a lot about it. He sits squarely at the center of several investigations into his conduct while serving as a lawmaker. Those accusations include sexual misconduct, drug use, and government obstruction. So Democrats and even a handful of Republicans quickly responded, calling the nomination unserious. Listen.
Presidents are entitled to have the people that they want in these key positions to carry out the mandate that's been delivered to him by the voters of the United States.
It's just kind of like a God tier kind of trolling, just to trigger a meltdown.
I just think it's silly. The president is smart enough and his team is smart enough to know that Mr. Gaetz will never get confirmed by the Senate.
A lot to break down here where Gaetz is concerned. CBS News political reporter Olivia Rinaldi, nice to have you back on CBS News 24/7. It's really clear, especially when you hear Representative Zeke Miller out of the state of Ohio, a Republican. He's not alone in thinking Gaetz will never get through confirmation. What are you hearing?
Well, Reed, I think shock was the word we heard from Republican sources on Capitol Hill yesterday. I'm not alone with my colleagues of getting that immediate reaction from representatives, but also policy advisors that serve in their offices, that they were really stunned by this pick of Matt Gaetz. Representative Michael Gaetz, he is the chair of the House Ethics Committee, and he's a Republican, said that he was even surprised, telling reporters yesterday. But as you mentioned, what's important throughout all of this is this has to go through Senate confirmation, and senators are already expressing some doubt that he would be able to be confirmed for Attorney General. Lisa Murkowski, the senior Republican from Alaska, saying that the early picks were surprising, but of Gaetz, she said that some of these picks are what she's calling comfort picks, that Trump is picking people at his comfort level. And it's really up to the Senate to decide whether or not it's their job to confirm his comfort picks or who is really best to serve in those roles. But I do also want to mention of sources I've talked to within Trump's camp, they tell me that this is exactly the type of person that they want. They believe that the people elected Donald Trump to cause disruption in Washington, and certainly a pick like Matt Gaetz, someone who has expressed really doubt about the DOJ and their separation between the Oval Office under President Biden's administration, but also the FBI, really casting doubt on their solidarity of standing alone as the Justice Department, as someone who would disrupt get in office, be completely disruptive of the ongoing investigations and the backgrounds into Donald Trump. So that's really the focus there of the Trump team, telling me that they like this pick, they like that it's causing disruption, and that's their ultimate goal in Washington.
And all eyes on the Senate and whether senators will do those recess appointments, which we understand the president-elect kind of likes the idea of, which would fast-track and circumvent hearings and confirmations, or whether they'll go through the confirmation process. That will be fascinating to see. So let's turn a page a little bit and focus on those campaign trail promises, those disruptive promises. Are these picks really a fulfillment of the president-elect doing what he said he would do, especially on the issues of immigration and mass deportations?
Absolutely. We know that that's his top goal, and you could see that reflected in some of the first names we learned to be his cabinet picks. Tom Homan, the former ICE director, coming back in to serve in that role. Also, Kristi Noem to serve as Department of Homeland Security director. Hearing that those were his top picks and the immediate ones we learned first is kind of indicative of what his goals are. He has always said that day one immigration, shut down the border, enact some executive action policies that would strengthen the U.S. southern border and, tighten the grip on mass deportations across the country. So we're going to see that reflected. Those are some of his promises. He's also promised action as well on inflation, on energy policies. I'm reminded of of something we heard often from him on the campaign trail, which was drill, baby, drill, and frack, frack, frack. Those are some of his key goals, and I'm struck by we haven't learned anything as far as EPA director. That's someone that I'm watching very closely to see who would be the director there, who would be his energy secretary. We've heard a few names as far as that is concerned. So really, we'll start to get a shape of what this administration looks like in the coming days, but I think it's indicative that people have been appointed to Department of Homeland Security, ICE, and to carry out these mass deportations as something that Trump is looking to do on his very first days in office.
CBS News political reporter Olivia Rinaldi, always having to know so much and get it through in so few minutes. Out of the park, Olivia. Nice to have you on CBS News 24/7. The House Ethics Committee faces mounting pressure today to release its report into those sexual misconduct allegations we mentioned earlier. So the group intended to vote on whether to make that report public tomorrow. We're talking about Matt Gaetz. His recent resignation from the House puts that vote into question at this hour. Several Republicans already defending Trump's choice for Attorney General, including Senator Lindsey Graham. Listen.
I think he's very smart. Time will tell.
What would be the implications?
Candidate?
What would be the implications of him on top of Justin?
And I think in the liberal world, it will be meltdown. But when you nominate some real liberal person, I vote for him, I'm great. When you nominate somebody like, well, he's not the brother of the president, but he's very close.
Senate Majority Whip Dick Durbin called on the Ethics Committee to immediately release all documents included in that Ethics Committee investigation into Mr. Gaetz. In a statement, he said, quote, "The sequence and timing of Mr. Gaetz' resignation from the House raises serious questions about the contents of the House Ethics Committee report." He also had this to say to reporters. Listen.
Make no mistake, this information could be relevant to the question of Mr. Gaetz' confirmation as the next Attorney General of the United States and our constitutional responsibility to advise and consent.
Mr. Chairman, do you think Trump is testing Senate Republicans if they'll buckle and bypass confirmation hearings?
I can't say anything about his motive.
What are the implications of Matt Gaetz being Attorney General?
Well, I want to know what's in this Ethics Committee report. It's a bipartisan investigation of some extremely serious charges. That has to be public. Let the American people then decide whether he's competent.
Perhaps a counterpoint there to what you heard Lindsey Graham saying, that liberals essentially will be in meltdown mode. The senator there saying, look, this was a bipartisan report. So let's bring in Zeke Miller, the chief White House correspondent for the Associated Press. Thank you so much for joining us. So this report getting a lot of questions. Walk us through why the report is seen by so many people as crucial, especially in a bipartisan way.
Well, this is a report that's being generated by a Republican-led House. The Ethics Committee is evenly divided, but Republicans are in charge in the House. They are integral to that investigation and drafting that report. As you saw in that last block, that quote from Congressman Max Miller, a Republican from Ohio, who has sparred with Congressman Gaetz, or now ex-Congressman Gaetz on the House floor for the last several years. There's not a lot of love lost between Matt Gaetz and a lot of his other Republican colleagues. So it's seen across the political spectrum as a fairly objective and thorough and non-politicized investigation into his conduct and whether it violates House rules. And because they don't have jurisdiction anymore, because he resigned, it's likely that may be the end of that investigation. But will a version of that report make its way across the other side of the Capitol to the Senate should these confirmation hearings go forward? That seems to be a very open question. You're even hearing from some Republican lawmakers that would want to see that, because there's also not a love lost between Senate Republicans and somebody like Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, and Zeke, stay with me here because we want to let our viewers hear this, because Gaetz really already handed over his letter of resignation to House leaders just moments ago. That letter was read out loud by the House clerk. We want to share that. We'll get your reaction on the other side. Listen.
I hereby resign as a United States Representative for Florida's 1st Congressional District, effective immediately, and I do not intend to take the oath of office for the same office in the 119th Congress to pursue the position of Attorney General in the Trump administration. Signed sincerely, Matt Gaetz, Member of Congress.
All right, so my question for you is really based on this understanding. If you don't like Matt Gaetz, you say that was strategy. If you do like Matt Gaetz, you say this shows confidence. What is your thought when you hear that letter read?
It's somewhere in between. Certainly, it does help him in terms of potentially putting a block on that potentially damaging how the House ethics investigation. It does show confidence that he wants to get that position. And also, House Republicans have a bit of a numbers problem on their hands as President-elect Trump has tapped into their membership and their very thin majority in the next Congress to try to that if they don't get that special election set up soon enough, that Speaker Mike Johnson might have some real problems holding some votes on some of the what they want to be President-elect Trump's agenda right after he takes office. So that sequencing does make sense. At the same time, there are a lot of questions about what is in this report. Will it make its way over to the Senate? Could it still be just as damaging? And given already the attention and the scrutiny that this announced nomination has garnered and generated, there are some serious doubts already in some Republican circles about whether or not this is some sort of ploy to give Gaetz an off-ramp out of Congress before this report comes out, that maybe this nomination actually won't ever make it to the floor and may end up getting pulled in some way, shape, or form. It remains to be seen how that plays out. And a lot of that really will lie in the hands of Senate Republicans. What sort of message are they sending in public and in private to the president-elect?
So let's talk about those Republican circles, because not all are on board with this pick, as we have seen and we're going to see as we get closer to the dinner time headlines. Just moments ago, we heard from Alaska Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski. Let's listen to that.
The early picks, as I have mentioned, some of the early picks, I think were surprising. They were surprising to me. Maybe they're not surprising to many who are very close within the Trump world. They appear to be people that the president-elect knows well, and he is selecting those who he's got a comfort level.
So the senator there talking about early picks, but did that trigger what a lot of people could read as an early indication of resistance from Republicans against Donald Trump's agenda?
She is certainly one of those Republican lawmakers on the bubble. Senate Republicans will have 53 votes. It's certainly a larger majority than they were expecting before Election Day, but still, it's still substantial. One or two dissenters won't be enough to scuttle a nomination like that. But in this case, there certainly could be more. And you're starting to see from Republican lawmakers sort of the distinction of a president is entitled to selecting their team, but then adding the caveat from a lot of Republicans. But this one is surprising, or this one is a little out there, or some other more colorful words that they may offer in private. And that will be the real test for them. This is Donald Trump's Republican Party. He feels that he's been elected now with a mandate to do what he wants and bring all the disruption that he wants to the nation's capital. Congress is a co-equal branch of government, and they will have to decide to what extent that they want to assert themselves against the president. Oftentimes, you'll see one, maybe several nominations scuttled, even from within of their own party because vetting issues or something else like that. So it would not be unprecedented at all. In some ways, it would be unprecedented for all of the nominees to sail through without any problems.
Well, Zeke, I want to ask you about something. In the hours, even the days leading up to that secret ballot vote in the Senate to choose the replacement for Senator Mitch McConnell, there were headlines that said that the president-elect really would like to have Rick Scott out of the state of Florida because he could get through more easily his appointments, perhaps even triggering those recess appointments, that mechanism in the Senate. Yesterday, were you taken back by that secret ballot result with Senator Thune chosen? Is that sort of a foot in the door saying, look, we senators, we're going to retain power here and the choice whether to have these confirmation hearings?
It's certainly an indication that they're not, lying down, that they're maintaining the will to put their foot down when they choose. The question is, how often are they willing to do that? That's sort of the question. Had it been somebody like Rick Scott as majority leader, he would have never challenged likely President-elect Trump. He'd made that clear. That was essentially his campaign platform. Now there's a chance. It doesn't mean that there's a certainty one way or the other.
It certainly means we'll be watching. Zeke Miller, Chief White House Correspondent, thank you so much. It's nice to talk to you today on CBS News 24/7. Man, it's like watching sports, only it's politics.